Annunciation Radio presents Say Yes to Life with Peter Range, Senior Fellow for Strategic Initiatives at the Center for Christian Virtue.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Say Yes to Life, where we learn to embrace our Catholic faith in the secular world. I'm your host, Peter Range, Senior Fellow for the Center for Christian Virtue, and welcome to show number 449 as we continue the fight for every single human life, born, preborn, and yours in our world today. I can't believe, Sean, that means it's going to be 450 next week. We should throw a party. We should have all the great guests that we've had back on the show. And my mother, I always try to celebrate with my mom on the show. So Mom, if you're listening, she's one of our 3 listeners across the state of Ohio and Michigan. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Today's show, we're excited to welcome back Dr. Alicia Thompson. Dr. Thompson is a board certified OBGYN with a passion for helping women and couples with their reproductive health. Her practice specializes in natural family planning and restorative reproductive medicine. We're going to talk about what that is. What is RRM, restorative reproductive medicine, on today's show. It offers hope to women experiencing infertility and other gynecological challenges. A veteran of the Air Force and a former fellow at the CDC, she also holds a master's in public health. Outside of her practice, Dr. Thompson is a dedicated advocate for the pro-life movement, volunteering at 2 local pregnancy resource centers and serving on the board of Ohio Right to Life. It's where I got to know Dr. Thompson a little bit. She's a happy and busy homeschooling mom. She has 6 children, which is just beautiful and amazing. Wonderful husband, beautiful kids. Again, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Trump administration's recent moves on in vitro fertilization. And most importantly today, because if you didn't listen to the show a few weeks back, we're going to be talking about alternatives in reproductive or restorative reproductive medicine that you really need to know about. And I think this conversation is it's so important that I am going to be skipping 180 seconds around Ohio and the nation, because I really want to spend enough time and give enough time to talk about this really important topic, just given everything that's taking place, from the administration on down. So again, Dr. Thompson, board certified OBGYN, and we had her on show 441. If you want to go back and listen to that show to hear her talk a little bit about in vitro fertilization and everything of that nature. But Alicia, as I was mentioning here, we had you on the show. I wonder if we can kind of start there by recapping that particular show. Most people assume IVF is a good thing. If you look at from a public polling perspective, it's kind of an 80-20, maybe 90-10 issue where most people are like, oh yeah, in vitro fertilization, it's helping people make babies, and we all want to be about making babies, particularly if you're pro-life, so it should be full steam ahead with it. But what would you say are maybe 2-3 things, or as many as you want to enumerate, things about IVF which make it kind of morally troublesome?
Great question, Peter. And again, thank you so much for having me back to the show. It's a privilege. I think, the most common ground when it comes to IVF that you and I would understand is that the desire to have children is a beautiful and noble goal. It is an incredible gift. And when people are experiencing infertility, it can feel like a terrible deprivation. And so the desire to grow a family, I think, is near and dear to our hearts, and especially my heart pours out to my patients who struggle with this. But how we pursue the desire to grow our family matters morally. And in the way I see it, generally, there are 2 real main issues with IVF. From a Catholic perspective, the first thing is that it separates the creation of life from the loving union of a husband and a wife. And so, of course, we know in God's design, a child should be the fruit of an act of love, not a product of a lab procedure. And so when life is made in that sense rather than begotten, we risk children made in this process being treated as something that's ordered or manufactured and not received as a gift. So I think that's the fundamental issue that the Catholic Church has with it. But then I think where most people can find common ground, and what I find very troubling, is that in the creation of human life in IVF processes, a staggering number of embryos are lost. And in fact, a huge study came out a couple of years ago looking at hundreds of thousands of cycles, and the embryo creation to live birth rate within a 12-month period is less than 5%. And that's pretty standard. So that 95% of embryos that are being created in IVF processes are not born alive in a year. A huge number are frozen, numbers are discarded, and they're genetically profiled, and life is being destroyed. So from a Catholic perspective and a pro-life standpoint, it's problematic because not because we're against babies, but because we believe every human life matters, even at its tiniest stage, when literally we're talking about life as a clump of cells, that those human beings deserve to be protected and cherished.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but most IVF clinics, grade embryos to determine the best embryos that will survive implantation into a woman's uterus. So, and there's no industry standard for that grading. So poor quality embryos, as you mentioned, often destroyed. I mean, we're practicing eugenics at the very beginning of life, determining which embryos we think are strongest and which should survive. I mean, you're automatically making the human person a product that you're grading, and you're determining whether or not that embryo is worthy of life or not. And that's a really scary thing for us to do. And, you talk about slippery slopes in these processes, but particularly when it comes to in vitro fertilization, you can see where there's people determining, I want to have a baby that's blue eyes or brown hair, whatever it might be. And they're going to discard the embryos that don't match their just generic physical criteria that they're looking for in an embryo. I saw actually at an interview done with a couple, it was a gay couple, and they were determining which child they wanted to create, and they chose the mother based upon the fact that she was a model. And so, we wanted our child to have good looks. And so the other embryos that didn't kind of, match up to their criteria, they weren't going to proceed with their surrogate that they were emplacing. But I know we're getting into, maybe a different subject there, but that eugenic part of this is really kind of scary to me. But let's get to President Trump. He recently made an announcement just this past week on expanding access to IVF. The bulk of the Trump IVF policy entails two main features: lowering the process on in vitro fertilization and other fertility treatments by lowering the costs of key drugs through the most favored nation pricing, and creating a new optimal employer fertility insurance benefit. So, making it more affordable for folks in those two kind of aspects. Now, Ryan Anderson, who I love dearly, I think he's very sharp politically, intellectually, from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And I just want to read a little bit of what he said about it, then get your kind of reaction to it as well. But he said the Trump IVF policy is perhaps the least bad that we could have hoped for. As I understand it, there's no IVF mandate and no government subsidy, so that's good things. So there are no direct religious liberty or conscience violations or concerns with taxpayer funding. But least bad is still bad. The entire thrust is to make something unethical more widely practiced. Such a policy is itself unethical. IVF as practiced today entails massive killing, as you outlined, and or freezing of embryonic human beings. IVF doesn't treat underlying causes of infertility and doesn't respect the dignity of the human person in his or her creation, which people should be begotten, not made. I should add one potential bright spot that was not highlighted during the Oval Office announcement. The new optimal employer fertility insurance benefit is fully customizable, so that an employer could opt to offer a benefit only for ethical fertility treatments like restorative reproductive medicine. If I've understood this correctly, it's something we should be promoting. And again, that's from Ryan T. Anderson. I encourage you to go look up his comments from the Ethic and Public Policy Center. But your reactions, Alicia, to the administration's announcement, and if, like Anderson, while you see kind of major issues with promoting something which is fundamentally unethical, there might be some silver lining in the midst of this particular decision.
Yes, I agree. And I think I agree with you. I very much admire Ryan Anderson and the work that he does at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And I think he summed this up perfectly when he said it's the least bad option. As you and I both know, in the pro-life movement, the IVF has been a big hot button issue, and I really think that right now we are getting deeply behind the ball by not having this conversation, not moving forward with ways that we could restrict it or make it more palatable and less ethically fraught in the creation and destruction of human embryos. And because we're not having that conversation, I think we're losing a lot of ground here. But I think in this way, he's absolutely correct when it's what I was afraid was going to come out, this is the least bad option. So I agree on the positive side. There's no government mandate being forced, like Little Sisters of the Poor type of thing, where every employer is going to be required to participate in IVF. That's not happening, thanks be to God. And that's also, so important for protecting conscience rights. But I agree that it's still the least bad. It's not the same as good. This policy goal is to make IVF more accessible. And while that is, met to very many welcome ears, when it comes to the pro-life movement, we understand how IVF is being done now and how destructive it is in human life. And so it's as IVF sits in this country right now, I am concerned that it's promoting something that's so ethically wrong in how it's being done by the sheer vast destruction of human embryos, and expanding something that's so immoral in the way it's being done it's not going to make it any better. In fact, I worry that it'll make it worse. But I also agree that there is some hope here. We've never had an administration that was so supportive, would speak about restorative reproductive medicine. And so while some of these drugs are by far most recognized in an IVF setting, that doesn't mean these drugs and some of the treatments that are offered in complex infertility care aren't also used in a restorative way. So I am hopeful that this plan can open up some doors for ethical and life-affirming options like that myself and others are using in restorative reproductive medicine. So that is a real opportunity that we have for education to show couples that there are ways to treat infertility that work with God's design, respecting every human life and respecting the dignity of the human person. So I think there is a silver lining that I'm hopeful will get off the ground soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And I think one thing that I wanted to emphasize before we get into restorative reproductive medicine, and Alicia kind of alluded to these things, but also want to direct you to Bishop Daniel Thomas right here in the Diocese of Toledo. He's the USCCB Pro-Life Secretariat leader, as well as Bishop Robert Barron, put out a joint statement, and they hit some really important points that, again, we just want to emphasize. First and foremost, we see the suffering of so many couples, and I'm using their words here, experiencing infertility, and know their deep desire to have children is both good and admirable. So we want to acknowledge that. Secondly, we want to acknowledge that every human person is a precious gift with infinite dignity and worth, no matter how that person was conceived. So we want to emphasize those two things. If you're somebody who's used IVF yourself in the past, we're not coming at this from a perspective of judgment, but we're coming at this from a perspective of what is truth, what is going to uphold the dignity of the human person, and how do our laws then affect the way that the rest of the country, the rest of the world is going to see this issue, and maybe is there better ways to kind of eventually approach this? Because ultimately, the IVF industry treats human beings like products and freezes or kills millions of children who are not selected for transfer to a womb or do not survive. That's a huge issue. That's a huge problem that we have to address and we have to acknowledge, no matter how bad, we might be struggling. And sometimes we think of children as a right, as it leads us to maybe think they're something we simply deserve. Children, ultimately, they're a gift of God, and we don't get to determine, whether or not we receive children, whether or not we don't, whether or not that child should come to birth or not. That's in God's hands. That's not in our hands. So let's get to the point of the show today, and that is to talk about restorative reproductive medicine, or RRM. Alicia, I wonder if we could just define our terms first. What is restorative reproductive medicine?
Oh, great question. So restorative reproductive medicine is, kind of right there in the name. It is a medical approach that aims to restore the body's natural fertility instead of bypassing it. The fundamental, the thrust of it is that infertility is a sign of an underlying problem. And while medicine would never say that we can solve every problem, we should at least be able to understand what the problem is to begin with. And so fundamentally, it works by cooperating with a natural process to restore it so that the body functions as it should, where assisted reproductive technologies recognizes that there's an underlying problem, but rather than going to a root cause restoration approach, it's more of a bypassing. And so it's just a philosophical and fundamental difference in how you would approach a treatment of a disease.
Yeah, my wife who suffers from polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, when she initially kind of went to the doctors as a young woman, I mean, she was just prescribed the birth control. She's having pain and stuff. And it's like, well, here, this will help you with the pain. But they weren't looking at kind of the root of the problems. And I think that's so important, whatever medical issue or challenge that you have. I mean, it's what we want our doctors to do and not just turn to something that can be prescribed quickly because it doesn't address those kind of underlying issues. Now, so RRM's primary goal then to find and treat the underlying medical issues contributing to infertility, endometriosis, hormonal imbalances, problems with ovulation quality, all those could be underlying issues. How exactly does a doctor, or how do you do that though? How do you find those root causes? And how many of the doctors would you say, I mean, did you experience this in medical school? Were you trained on it, or did you kind of learn about this later? I mean, how many doctors are actually trained to find these root causes?
Oh, it's such a great question, and we are not serving our patients well when it comes to general residency education. When I was training up as a resident, the only real exposure that I got to advanced treatment of infertility was by rotating through my IVF rotations, my reproductive endocrinology and infertility rotation. Apart from that, you have to understand most residents are taking care of uninsured, lower socioeconomic status women who often healthcare doesn't, their benefits don't cover infertility care, and there's not necessarily a lot of health literacy. Most of the time when people are seeking advanced care for reproduction, they're usually further along in life, and so I didn't get a lot of exposure to it when I was a resident. But thanks be to God, doctors will often be inspired to look harder because of what our patients are asking us. So when I had my conversion experience, I didn't even know a single person who was using natural family planning. I had no idea. So when I had my conversion, a couple of Catholic women were like, would you look at my charts, their fertility charts? And I thought, I don't even know what you're looking at. I don't even know what this is. And so I had to take it upon myself to learn about it, to train in these different methods, to understand basic science that's been around since 1960 that nobody really found valuable enough to even teach me. And so I kind of went out on my own, like so many of us do, and we learn about something because we know there's a need for it, and the need is not being met. And so fortunately, thanks be to God, since I started studying this years ago, it is widely expanded. Our watches have abilities to ask us about our charting. And so when a woman comes into me today versus what it was like 5 or 6 years ago, there's usually so much more knowledge that this woman will have, or even a girl will have about her body based on the way that the world seems to be going toward a deeper understanding of what reproductive health looks like, and using the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, that having normal, healthy periods with robust ovulation should be the gold standard of what reproductive health looks like in young reproductive age females. I think that makes complete sense. And so when I have a woman that comes in, I right away try to ask her and kind of feel out, well, how much knowledge does she have about her cycles? If she has fertility charts, I want to see them. I want to understand, are her periods regular? Is she making good signs of healthy ovulation, good quality mucus? Is she observing temperature shifts? Has she been checking her hormones and her urine at home? There's all sorts of ways that you can try to track your fertility, apart from what, people like to dismiss it as like the rhythm method. Here's your period day one, and this is what it looks like. So when couples come in, I start there with the female's reproductive cycle. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we check. We check for, of course, male factor can affect 40% of infertility cases. So there are ethical ways of doing semen analysis. There's advanced endocrinology workup that we do. There's robust checking of the pelvic environment, the immune system, all sorts of things that we're able to offer. And it is far more detail-oriented than I was ever exposed to when I was training up as a resident. And thanks be to God, the horizon is so wide open, and it keeps getting expanded. So I think there's so much promise in what we're going to do in the future, but also promise in what we're doing now.
So one really important part out of your answer there, and then one kind of question to follow up on it. So first and foremost, patients, and this is important for everybody listening to the show, patients are really drivers when it comes to your own personal care and medicine. And so you have to be a champion for yourself, and you have to be willing to bring maybe something that your doctor hasn't seen before, and ask them to research it and to help and assist in that way. You know, if women didn't bring charts to Dr. Thompson, maybe she never would have learned about it in a sense. And so if you're a patient, you know, champion your own health and don't be afraid to do that. Two, I'm curious, Dr. Thompson, though, what would it take for the medical system? Because just, you know, looking at some things before the show, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, for example, they claim they're a 501c3. They have a whole kind of, you know, page telling us that restorative reproductive medicine isn't really kind of medicine and stuff. So what would it take for the medical system to become a driver with this for RRM, given that there's so many millions, maybe billions of dollars that are promoting just IVF, and they want people to kind of go down the IVF track? Do you see any possibility of the kind of larger medical establishment changing their thoughts or their opinions on RRM versus IVF?
You know, that's such a great question. I wish that ACOG was less political and more open to the voices of its membership. There's such a big gap there. I feel when I read the article like ACOG put out, it's like, I don't think they have any idea what I'm doing in my office every week. You know, I have couples that come in and see me and they have every plan to pursue ART and they know what it is. And my job as a physician primarily is to educate. That is my primary job, is to inform and educate on what care looks like, regardless of what pathways they go down. So I want couples and women to understand the full scope of what's available. And I often talk about ART. And I say, this is what it looks like. This is what you can expect. And I try to do it in a very direct, non-judgmental way, as my profession would want me to do. But then I also offer something that my profession sometimes seems to sneer at. But, you know, it's very unsettling. I have had women come to me who have gone through IVF and have not gotten pregnant. And they say, then I call that running out of road. When medicine lays out a pathway for you to follow, and then you come to the end of it, and you have not achieved the goal that you hope to achieve when you set out on that pathway, what is left for our patients? And I completely agree with you that it is our patients who drive us to know more, to push more. Now, some couples will eventually come to the end of their desires to continue to pursue infertility treatments. You know, I'd love to say that RRM will help every single couple get pregnant, but that's not true. It's not the story of every single couple that they will get pregnant and carry home babies. It's just not everybody's story, and I wish it was. And one day when I get to heaven, I hope to ask God, you know, and why, how did some people get to suffer and others didn't? And I don't know the answer to that. But when these couples go along, I want them to know that I journeyed alongside with them, that I did my very best to help them to understand what was going on, why they weren't getting pregnant. And if some of them go out of my office and pursue ART, I will welcome them back when they come back to see me, because I love the woman in front of me and I want to help her regardless of what she may choose, even if I agree or disagree. And it was very dismissive, I think, the statement that they came out against RRM. I'm like, I don't think that they even know what's going on. And so often some of these women, as I said, have come to us because they've gone down the preferred pathway and have not gotten the result, or they can't afford the care that's being offered to them. So I found it to be pretty dismissive. But what would it take for the upper echelons to come alongside? Well, the patients ask the doctors do their best, the science expands, and as more data is published, more people are having success, it drives the push from patients more, and it goes up the chain, and eventually ACOG will jump on board. And I'd hope that would be in my lifetime, but considering how opposed to the pro-life aspect of the profession they are, I'm not super hopeful in that way.
Yeah. A couple websites for people to check out: naprotechnology.com, fertilitycare.org. And then if you just literally Google Napro Technology near me, you're also going to get some results in that sense. And Dr. Thompson, if there's anything that you think people should look up as a good website if they want to learn more about kind of Napro Technology, different fertility care methods, please point individuals to that. We only got 3 minutes left in the show. I did want to ask this one question just to get your thoughts on it. I saw in one study earlier today, actually, infertility affects around 17.5% of reproductive age individuals worldwide. That seems really high to me. That's from the National Institute of Health. Why, or is there any understanding of why infertility rates are so high right now, or have you done any research or thoughts on that?
That's a great question. Well, one of the first things that we have to understand, in 1970, the average age of first birth for women in the United States was 20. Now it's 28. So we are delaying childbearing, and this is one of the big, I think, lies of the culture, is that women can delay childbearing and not increase rates of infertility. That's just not possible. As we wait longer and longer and longer, and we push off, and so many women are trying to have children well into their 30s and even into their 40s, if you have subfertility, you may struggle and you may not be able to conceive regardless of what technology is available. So that's one thing. There's another huge important part, though, that seems to be environmental toxins, endocrine disruptors. And while I don't say that hormones themselves, like birth control, causes infertility, I don't say that. I will say that taking hormonal contraceptives shut off a process that can be, as I said, a vital sign for health. So when a woman comes to me, as you said, like your wife with PCOS, has irregular cycles, she's telling you, they come to you and they say, something's wrong. And the answer is, well, if this system isn't working, why don't we just shut it off? That can then kick the can down the road where, maybe a decade later, she's 27, 28, or 30, coming off of a pill. Well, nothing's been corrected. And in fact, she may have been dismissed as an adolescent or an early 20s, and an opportunity to take care of her and help her has been passed for 10 years. So I don't love contraceptive for that birth control specifically for that reason. It shuts off a process and it can put blinders on. So I think there's a whole host of reasons why infertility rates are going up. Certainly age, environmental things, and also a failure to recognize and treat things because we're not even able to perceive an abnormality to begin with.
Gosh, Dr. Thompson, you're like this giant ball of knowledge that I just want to keep asking questions to, but thanks so much for coming on today, talk a little bit about restorative reproductive medicine as an alternative to IVF. Please go look that up. Get married young, go have babies, wear cotton, not plastic, don't do the pill, and research restorative reproductive medicine, including reaching out to Dr. Thompson if you can. God bless everybody and keep saying yes to life. 450 shows next week on Say Yes to Life here at Annunciation Radio. Take care.